I've gotten a ton of questions about mixing stations in Schedule 1. People always ask what's the best layout, what's the best order assignment, and what's the best mix in general. So today I'm running another massive test to help you figure out exactly what works best for you and your builds. Spoiler alert, just like my last test series, if you've been following some guide telling you to use any 8 mix, or even a 4 mix for every product, you might be doing it wrong. And hey, that's okay. I thought that was the best method too until now. Let's dive in and figure this out together. And a quick warning before we get into this video is going to be super long and very rambly. I get into a lot of theory and speculation on this stuff. So if you're not into all the nerdy shit, just skip to whichever data tables are relevant to you, whether that be the overall production tables or the total revenue tables, as well as the final conclusion section, because that's where the most important information is without speculation. Okay, I'm recording this part before I even start this test because I just want to share my initial thoughts and kind of hypothesize about what I expect to see. I've been playing this game for a pretty long time now, and just from watching all of these employees work, I've noticed a few things about the chemists here. Namely that there's a lot of overlap when you assign one chemist to work on 4 mixing stations. And personally I've always run these 4 mixes because it feels like it's number one, the maximum that you can support with your daily deliveries, meaning that it's just more convenient to order 4 ingredients rather than 8. So therefore a 4 mix would be the highest profit, right? However, in this game, volume tends to win out over the highest profit, so I want to go ahead and test out every possible option at the highest price so that we can figure out which one actually is the best. I also feel like because of that overlap that the chemist has when working 4 mixing stations, I want to give him a try when we only supply 3 mixing stations and see if that can improve efficiency at all, or if it makes it worse. Now, in addition to all of this, remember the early hype days in Schedule 1? People were swearing by like making big 8 mixes, and you have to assign the chemists in alternating orders and all of this stuff. Well, personally, I never really bought into that. It just didn't make sense to me. So I'm gonna test all of that too, because if I've learned anything, it's this. Trust no one, and find out for yourself. Now, before we dive into the data, I want to lay out all of the ground rules for this experiment and clarify a few things so that nothing gets misinterpreted. First, here's a quick rundown of every setup that I tested. For all setups, I only counted bricks that made it off of the mixers and into the brick press each day. That way every setup is measured by the same standard. No funny business. Second, we need to talk about priming and why it matters. You'll see a visual later comparing a primed 8 mix versus an unprimed one. The data and what you see in game both show that priming boosts total output and makes it more consistent across each day. Priming just means letting the whole system fill up every mixer before the first brick is ever pressed. So every input and output slot is full from the jump. We do this by assigning the chemists in order: Mixer 1, Mixer 2, Mixer 3, and Mixer 4. And because the machines fill up from front to back, they're forced to work in reverse, from 4 back to 1, making space as they go. This clearly helps every setup involving 2 chemists or inline mixing, so I used it across the board to keep things fair. Now let's go over the 2 styles of chemist assignment that I mentioned previously. The staggered method that I mentioned, also called alternating, has chemist 1 on mixers 1, 3, 5, and 7, and then chemist 2 on mixers 2, 4, 6, and 8. You've probably seen people say that this helps them move faster. On the flip side, we've got the inline transfer method, and this one's simple. Chemist 1 gets mixers 1 through 4, and Chemist 2 gets mixers 5 through 8. Straight down the line, no alternations. We'll be comparing both of these today using the exact same setups to find out which assignment method actually performs better. One more note, when I say HS or horseshoe, that's just my way of describing a layout with 2 rows of mixers. It reduces walking time by looping the ingredients forward and then back again, instead of stretching out on one long line. So by the end of this experiment, we'll know 2 things. Which chemist assignment strategy is more efficient, and which mixer size fits best in your operation based on how much product you're producing each day. Alright, now let's take a look at what priming actually looks like in action. First up, here's a graph comparing an 8-mix setup that was primed versus one that wasn't. You'll notice immediately that the primed setup stays consistent day after day, while the unprimed one dips and lags in spots. That's because priming pushes the whole system to operate at its upper limit from the start instead of wasting time ramping up. I want to point out on day 4, that 6 that was produced, what's happening here is essentially an artificial traffic jam being created by the chemist. Because they're assigned in overlapping orders and they don't have a completely full supply, they'll actually back themselves up into each other, which causes them to walk out of the building due to having no work to be done, and thus lowering overall efficiency and reducing output. Now let's go ahead and roll the time lapses of each prime setup running, and as they play, I'll break down the chemist's movement patterns so that we can get a visual feel for how these different setups operate. This right here is an example of an unprimed, staggered assignment layout. And I'm talking about the 8-mix setup here. I want you to keep an eye on these 2 chemists. What you'll see here is that they work in unison pretty well until all of a sudden randomly one of them will not be able to work because he's waiting on the other chemist to fill his mixer, so then he'll stop working and walk out of the building periodically. Now here we have an example of the exact same 2 setups, which is the 8-mix staggered assignments and the 3-mix inline horseshoe, and we'll go ahead and take a look at what these guys are up to. Over here on the 3-mix side, we can see that as the final mixer finishes, the chemist moves to the second, moves the product, goes back. Everything is pretty efficient, and he doesn't appear to walk away from the stations, although I feel like I did catch him a couple of times throughout the week, maybe getting a minute or 2 of downtime. Now over on the opposite side in our 8-mix, we see that these 2 guys are working in their staggered assignments, and everything's flowing a little bit better because it's been primed. But if you watch closely, every once in a while, one of them will get stopped because they're waiting on the other chemist to put their product in the next mixer. They'll end up just walking out of the building for a couple minutes. It's not a huge deal, but it does cause enough of a delay to where you notice the difference. And here we have our next example, which is going to be our 8-mix inline horseshoe, as well as our dual 2-mix inline horseshoe. Now what you can see is that at the beginning of this video, only one chemist was working on the 8-mix because he's working in that reverse order. But once he gets all the way done with all of his 4 stations, the next chemist is going to walk in and start up his work. And once they're both doing their thing, they're never going to stop because they have no downtime due to both being assigned 4 stations and working in reverse order. This means that Chemist 1 will never be waiting for Chemist 2 to give him something to produce, because Chemist 2, his first action will always be to give the next chemist his product. And as you can see in the dual 2-mix at the bottom of the screen, our chemist has 100% uptime, so he's constantly making mixes in the correct order, because again, this system is primed, so he's taking everything off of the exit mixers and then adding new product from his first step of the mix. However, he's not producing at quite maximum speed simply because he is assigned 4 mixers and there is a little bit of overlap. In this example, we have our 4-mix inline horseshoe as well as our 6-mix staggered horseshoe. As you can see over on the 4 mix side, our chemist is functioning fairly similar to the other chemist assigned to 4 mixers. The only difference is that this one is now working in reverse order around the whole horseshoe. This obviously slows down production by a little bit more than 50%. And that's simply because he's taking more steps to do essentially the same thing. Over on the 6 mix side, what we can see is that there is a lot more efficiency in comparison to the staggered 8 mix due to the timing of only being assigned 3 mixers each. However, if you look closely, you will notice sometimes they still end up walking out of the building. And again, this is due to staggering their assignments rather than doing them in line. One chemist is always going to end up waiting on the other due to these artificial sort of traffic jams that they make. And in our final example here, we have the inline 6 mix as well as the triple single mix. Now obviously our chemist that's working on the triple single mix is running at maximum efficiency here. He's basically always taking a mix to the brick press and starting a new one. The spacing ends up working out kind of well for him because it prevents him from walking away. And up on our inline 6 mix, what you'll notice is the chemists again are working in that reverse order, which means 2 things. Number 1, the primary mixer, which means the mixer that is sent into the brick press, the ultimate mixer, is always prioritized. And if the other chemist ends up walking out, it's only because he has nothing to do, not because he doesn't have product to mix. It's because he literally just has downtime, which it's unfortunate that he will walk a little bit out the door. It's much better than the other version where you're actually seeing those sort of traffic jams happen with your product due to wait times between them interacting. In this version, it's solely based on the fact that they're actually, in a way, too efficient and they have too much time on their hands because they're making more product and they're doing it faster. Now that we've watched each of these setups a little bit in motion, it's time to take a look at the actual numbers, total and average output across all of them. Right off the bat, it's clear the 2 chemist setups using inline transfer actually outperformed the staggered counterpart, both in output and consistency. Although this is only a marginal difference, it would add up to a lot over time if results were expected to be consistent. At the very worst case, the assignment does not matter, so anybody who says that you need to alternate them is completely wrong. The 8 mix and 6 mix setups both pulled ahead when using the inline assignment. The difference might seem small day to day, but it adds up. We're talking hundreds of extra bricks over a long playthrough. So why does the inline setup perform better? It's simple. The walking time. Every extra step that your chemist takes between animations costs time. The inline transfer minimizes that distance, whereas the staggered setups make the chemist crisscross constantly, wasting steps and lowering overall efficiency. That walking compounds over time and leads to a measurable loss. Now that we've nailed down which chemist assignment method works best when using 2 chemists, let's move on to something that's just as important. The size of the mixer, the consumption of ingredients, and the limitations of deliveries. All of this stuff determines whether your layout can actually keep up. First, a quick caveat, your real-world results may vary slightly from this data depending on how far your mixers are from the door of your property. The walking distance affects everything, so plan your layout with that in mind. I conducted this experiment, generally speaking, towards the middle front of the building for consistency. Second, remember that for any of these setups to hit 100% efficiency, each mixer must always be fully stocked with both base product and all of your ingredients. If you ever let one of them run dry, you'll lose efficiency and you'll need to reprime the entire line to get it back to full speed. Now let's take a look at the rest of our mixing setups. All of these ones use only a single chemist. As you can see, the 4 mix made 10.29 bricks per day, the 3 mix made 13.43 bricks per day, The dual 2 mix made 21.14 bricks per day. The triple single mix made 39.43 bricks per day. And the quad single mix only made 37.29 bricks per day. What this means is that you can further tailor your specific layout to the numbers that you can expect to be able to be mixed. Meaning that, for example, if you had a maxed out mess property, you could very nearly supply this dual 2 mix almost perfectly, depending on where you place it. Maybe if you placed it a little further away from the door, it would decrease that a little bit, and therefore stay fully supplied all the time. The triple single mix obviously produces the most because it has the least downtime, the least walking time, and the most mixer uptime. We can see the difference that we get between assigning one chemist to 4 mixing stations versus 3 when we compare the 4 mix and the 3 mix, or the triple single with the quad. Both of them have a significant loss in efficiency, so clearly it is best to use one chemist per 3 mixing stations if it's applicable to your situation. Now for the actual ingredient math. For simplicity, let's assume that you're using mixes with no overlapping ingredients. This gives us a clean way to calculate the daily ingredient demand per setup. I'll show a graph here so you can see exactly how much each mixer type will burn through each day. So a big question is going to be, can you actually supply this many ingredients? As most of you know, it can be really annoying trying to order 8 different ingredients when you need nearly 1,600 total in a day. Each van can only hold 320. So here's what this looks like. Generally speaking, you can easily get 4 vans delivered per day automatically. That's 1,280 ingredients. With tight timing, you could squeeze in maybe 6 vans and get 1920 total. If you bring your own vans full of ingredients, that's even better. So based on those numbers and the ingredient table, you'll be able to figure out which mixer size your operation can realistically support without running dry. And that is going to bring me to our final table here. This is my example of the maximum profit mix when assigned for each specific product in each specific mixing setup so that you can decide which you think is best based off of these numbers here. As you can see, we still have this same inverse bell curve where all of the numbers on the bottom and all of the numbers on the top are higher than the numbers in the middle. Now, don't go jumping to any conclusions here just yet, because first we have to pinpoint viability. We can't just assume that every 4 mix is bad and every single mix is good just because the number is higher. The single mix also requires a much larger amount of production. What we need to consider here is how much we can produce of a specific product in a single property and then be able to mix on 100% uptime. Now, keeping that in mind, here's what I'm going to point out about this. For weed, the triple single mix is actually quite a good profit and can be fully sustained by a single property. This is the way that I would recommend to mix weed because you can do one ingredient and get to 100% addiction rate and have a slight boost to your profit rather than overall lowering your profit, because every time that you mix it after that first mix, you will actually go lower than the base profit of weed in a single property. Meth, on the other hand, you cannot produce enough to keep up with a triple mix in a single property. So this one we're going to move on to the dual 2 mix because it actually fits quite well. I wouldn't go beyond that because there's diminishing returns due to the time investment as well as the money that you'll spend on extra chemists and extra supplies. Now, moving on to mixing cocaine, this one is going to be a bit of a two-parter. It depends on which quality that you want to make. In my opinion, this is what makes cocaine a bit inconvenient in the current state of the game, due to its high production costs, as well as complexity of manufacturing, because if you want heavenly quality, then your best option is actually the worst option, being the 4 mix. Because that's right around the same amount of production that you can supply, and it's the most amount of profit that you can get with heavenly quality. If you were to go ahead and drop down to standard, I don't know, maybe premium would work. but you would be able to get either the 3 mix or the 6 mix going. However, that being said, I still don't think that the 6 mix would be worth it because you would need a larger property and you would make more money in that property if you were just producing some other product instead. The best bang for your buck for all of these is going to be setting up something small in the stash and dash. Specifically for cocaine, it would be the 3 mix in the stash and dash, and you'd still be hitting 100k, and that's pretty good for a very little investment. So essentially, if you're gonna make cocaine, it basically has to be at least 3 mixed like that, or you could do the 4 mix. But if you're not going to do that, I would not even make cocaine at all. I would just focus on weed and maybe do one property with meth and mix the meth. That's what will make it easiest on you in terms of deliveries or dropping off your own vans, however you like to do it. Until we see some more updates coming with properties and also changes to the stack sizes and deliveries, these are probably going to be your best options. So hopefully these numbers will continue to help in the future after we see what those updates are, and maybe things will change then. I don't know, you guys let me know what you think. Did I miss any variables? Is there something else that I overlooked? Let me know. If you've got more theories or game mechanics that you want me to test, drop them in the comments. I read everything that you guys send. And look, these test videos take a huge amount of time to put together, so if you found this helpful, give it a like and hit subscribe. It helps the video reach more people. Don't leave your fellow dope dealers in the dark. Share the knowledge. As always, thanks so much for watching. Peace.